Morning again. It's us at Kett's Books. We're hopefully easing towards an end of a lockdown situation. We're always very optimistic about it. But in any case, we're back for Books at Lunchtime. It's me, Tracy in the shop, and you'll see, because you're eagle-eyed here, we've also got somebody else here, and we'd like to welcome Elizabeth Buchan this morning. So good morning to you.
Good morning.
Good morning. So we're very delighted to have you here because you joined us last year for one of our favourite events, actually, which was Authors in Conversation down at the Arts Centre in Wymondham, and it was a really lovely evening, and we thought we actually wanted to chat with you a little bit more to find out about your various writings. So can we jump in straight away?
Cool.
I have still here the hardback edition of the Museum of Broken Promises, but could you start by telling us a little bit about this one, please? Oh, and Tracy's got the more portable paperback. Tell us about this.
Well, it all came from a trip to Prague 20 ago, I suppose, where our son, who's really wonderful, felt that my husband and I were overworking. So he said, I'm going to send you on a weekend break. And beloved and wonderful as he is, he was also quite poor. So he spent January when it was -20. So there was less romantic across River dawdle than sort of many layers of underwear and Bristol around the museum. And we found ourselves in the Museum of Communism, which in those days was a rather small and amateur operation, not like the wonderful place it is now, where somebody had put together the artifacts from the communist era, including the school tins, a bit of clothing, some of the propaganda kind of thing. But the thing that absolutely changed my sort of life, really, I think, was walking to the mock-up of a cell where prisoners were interrogated during the communist era, and it had nothing in it except this table and 2 plastic chairs with cigarettes, and in the middle of the table was a black Bakelite phone, one of those old ones. And when you walked in, the curators had so contrived it that it, with that discordant, harsh sort of, and I jumped out of my skin. And it never left me, that image. So I went and started researching, and I found out about Prague and communist Czechoslovakia as it was then, and began to think about it and about museums and what they do, how they connect with us, and how they preserve the past, and how they relate to you. And then the story began to unfold of a woman who is half French, who went to Paris to work for a Czech couple just before the Velvet Revolution, and found herself in Prague with them during one hot summer, and connecting with some of the underground subversive politically anti-ist elements, including a rock group which was based on the people of the universe. I don't know if any of you have come across them, but they were a wild underground subversive youth during those years. And her relationship with the lead singer of them, and what this meant, how she reacted to being subversive, how she reacted, how to being in a country which she really has no idea about the rules. For example, she had no idea that actually going out in rather low-cut dresses was going to draw attention to the family she worked for and the people she was surrounded by. And simply, it was a kind of innocence, and how that innocence began to peel back. Also, the innocence about herself and her feelings, and about her moral integrity when it came to when pushed up and she found herself in trouble, and how that has haunted her for the rest of her adult life, having gone back to Paris after the debacle in Prague, and finding life very much at a loose edge, and wandering down a Parisian street and seeing a house there that needed doing up. The idea came to her to make a museum, and more specifically, a museum of broken promises.
And so I really enjoyed this book, but I had no idea when you were here before, because I hadn't read it at that point, that it was that rich, because it was we sort of just got about the museum itself, and I didn't really understand about what was going to be going on in the rest of it. And it is very much full of politics and how people don't understand if they aren't part of it, and you have to be respectful of their understanding. There's a lot of espionage, there's and there are relationships, and
Yeah.
I had understood about the relationships, but I kept watching our readers, and so men were reading the book, and I thought, because I knew that she falls in love and there's the rock star and all that. I was really surprised at the men who were enjoying it. And I kept waiting for them to say it's a girl's book. And they kept saying, no, I really enjoyed it. And it is much more than, it's almost like Spies Have Feelings too.
Yes, I think there is that element. And I just wanted to sort of point out the subversion in all of, and yet when against implacable regimes, how that version works. And for example, the small shopkeeper would have the communist posters above the wares that they were purveying, the prescribed wares, but actually under the counter, there were all sorts of things going on in the way of bar and illicit wares, artifacts to sell to people. And there are a lot of commentaries at the time about how, in order to survive that regime, which wasn't murderous in the way that it had been very early on when people were dragged off and put down the mines and killed in prisons, but it was murderous in the sense that it destroyed your individual and your way of thinking. They even wanted to know what kind of jokes you made if you were somebody they were interested in watching. And as a result, there is this sort of, I think Ivan Klima talks about it in his, about how split into two, how on one level you operate as the conforming good citizen, and then underneath, particularly when you take your time off on holidays and you go to the country maybe, which a lot of people did from the cities, and you behaved in another way and you allowed yourself to think and feel and behave, just perhaps expressing it in dancing, the meal around the campfire with the family in a completely different way. And that is the way the Czechs, I think, reacted. Whether or not we over here would react, we've never had the same kind of fascist, totalitarian, well, not fascist, communist, totalitarian regime upon us. So it's interesting how you, the human being, with yearnings and instinctive, I think, feelings for freedom and freedom of expression and thought, behave when things are so difficult and so cast in iron that you feel you don't have much option. So that was one about the book. And also, it's also a reflection of how we are when we're not under subversive regimes. We very often present ourselves one way and we're living a completely different mental life. So I wanted that sort of level come into the book as well.
So this is, from what I can see, having looked at your books, this is the first time you've written specifically about Czechoslovakia, but you actually quite enjoy the betrayal, the spy, the things not being what they seem, the I can't begin to tell you isn't just about somebody having had a bad day. That's actually the state secret, I can tell you, but then I'd have to kill you, that kind of. And you write quite a lot of books like that and set in Europe as well, but it wasn't always that way, was it?
No, when I started out, well, actually, no, I started out books. I did a couple of children's books, being a little biography of Beatrice Potter before I started writing properly. Well, not properly, because I mean, children's books demand as much, if not more, than if you're writing adult books for adults. I happened to be wandering up and down the London Library, which I belong to then, no longer, sadly. And I pulled out a book which was written in 1796 by somebody called Georges Lenotre, and it was Paris and its outskirts. And it was a sort of topography guide. And I opened it up, and then at the back was one of those old fold-out maps of Paris, and I saw it an instant, and Paris was surrounded by a wall that is no longer there, which was the customs wall, through which there were openings which were policed. And I suddenly looked at this and I thought, my God, Paris is a pressure cooker, because it was contained within this wall. And I thought, well, I'll write the French Revolution, so I set about that. it wasn't a very good book, I'm sorry to say. It was sort of love and lust in the shadow of the guillotine. But I think it was a beginning. You all have to have a beginning. You all have to somewhere to develop your techniques and your voice and how you think and how you feel. And I was auctioned. And then I moved on to another book about the Special Operations Executive, because just after the war, my aunt married a German army officer who she'd known before the war. And this was in 1945, 46, I think. And my father, because their father was already dead, had to take her to the altar limping on the leg, which he'd got the bullet wound from the Italian campaign, so to give his sister to technically the enemy. So I began to think about those blurrings of frontiers between what we set up as societies and combatants and what actually matters and what actually people feel and want to experience, because there would have been hostility on both sides to that particular marriage, but somehow it had to be got through. A truce had to be declared between two sets of technical named enemies, and how do you go from there? And I thought the Special Operations Executive, which is always addictive anyway, it held some of those ideas within its vision and within its execution. So I sent my half French girl off to France, occupied France, and she begins to fall in love with a German officer and what happens there. So that was that. And then I wrote something about, because I thought the garden was such a wonderful metaphor for sort of living and death and renaissance, and how someone who falls in love with someone, marries them, they don't love her, but they need money, a story, finds resolution and spiritual comfort, physical outlet by devoting herself to the garden, how that makes it possible to receive the thing that she most wants in life. But it doesn't come at her from a direct angle. It comes from an angle. That's probably a mark of maturity, when you think you want some things in life and you continue to do so, but they don't come at you in the obvious way. And you have to be old enough in your mind and mature enough or sensitive enough, and hopefully we all do become like that, to see where it comes from and to accept it for what it is. And that was called Consider the Lily. And it won, to my astonishment, the Novel of the Year award, and that was lovely. I've never received so many bouquets of flowers in my life. My husband walked into the kitchen. He said, "Blimey, who's dead?" So that was very nice. So then on to, I think a lot of novelists, and I was talking to Reverend the other day, tend to circle around a subject, an arena, because see it from different points of view. So I was very much trapped in the domestic arena, not entrapped, but I was meshed in it, the domestic arena, even though I was working with two small children. And how was that working out? And how did you develop and how do you cope various demands on you, work, children, a partner, domesticity, running, that kind of thing. So the books I wrote then were very much within that sort of orbit. And I wrote one called The Revenge of the Middle-Aged Woman, which, again, to my astonishment, I thought it was perhaps not one of my best, but people seemed to like it, and possibly it was the title. Anyway, it was made into a telly in America, so that was lovely. I got letters from all over the world from people saying, I love this book, and including the one from Poland, which I treasure, which said, "You have made a woman's of me." So I've kept that in my files. And then I walked on, but then, you like to keep you within, this is not to be rude to publishers who I adore, but they like to keep you within rut. Rut is the wrong word, but within a certain channel, because it is much easier for them, because they have the demands of marketing and bookshops, much easier for the acquisition. It's an instant sort of marketing, and you can see things from their point of view. But I really wanted to move on into different arenas, and so I did write I Can't Begin to Tell You, which again went back to SOE, and I wanted to call it 1,000 Little Lies. Thank you. Yes, because it was about how you, as an undercover, which the heroine Kay was, you build up a tiny little accretion is come the one, but the publisher didn't like that. They preferred I Can't Begin to Tell You, which is, it's a different title, and it doesn't convey the meaning in the way that I tried to write the book. And anyway, I didn't go back to France. I went to Denmark because I thought, he's done Denmark much in the war, and I thought it was very interesting to go and look at ground I knew nothing about. And I came away absolutely full of admiration, having done my researches on the Danes during the war. They were extraordinary. Of course, some of them were collaborators, etc., but the majority weren't. And there was something like 3,000 Jewish people living there, and the order went out in August 42 to round up the Jews. Apart from 200 who were too old or too ill or didn't want to do, the rest of them were spirited away. They went to hide in barns, they were put into church crypts, taken across the Sound to Sweden. You had to pay for it, but they were taken across. Those Jewish people, by and large, survived. And I thought that was amazing. As one, the Danes rose up and said, we're not having it. What do you mean, Jewish people? Who are the Jews? We are all. And I thought that was quite extraordinary. So that was all those books began to evolve. And then again, I went back to the subject of the two enemies, and I turned it round, which was based on an article. I wrote a book called The New Mrs. Clifton, about how a British intelligence officer who'd been working in Berlin, and when the Allies finally broke through and things were going on in Berlin, finds starving, abused German girl and marries her and brings her home to Clapham Common and his two sisters who are living in family house, and how that situation presented itself to a country and a city that was battered and bleak and grey and smelling awful because it had no soap, and presented with a man who was German, who was the enemy, and what happens within the family. And there's a murder. And I wanted to wrap it around the murder, which was a sort of symbol for the death of relations between countries during the Second World War and the sort of consequences that stemmed from it, really. I read a book by Keith, oh gosh, I've forgotten his name, called, oh, and I've forgotten that name too, but it was about the continent after the war and how it was really feral, and how societies had gone completely, they discarded everything he considered civilized, including the Germans, who had no aspirins, no nappies, no clocks. You couldn't get a clock. There was a huge influx, migration of German-speaking peoples from Eastern Europe because they were, knocked out by Poland and Czechoslovakia, and it was mayhem. And children had no schooling in civilization at all, so they stole, they were violent, there was no order, there was nothing. And I felt that we were very lucky here within the island because those semblance of that order was still with us, whereas in the continent, it had continents. That was Keith, an absolutely brilliant book. And it was quite a shocking and revelation. And after I read that, I began to write The New Mrs. Clifton.
You're very prolific, and you keep your readers satisfied. You're always writing new, aren't you? And we had a bit of an internal debate about whether to talk to you now when you were available or to wait a few weeks when you're going to be in high demand again, because you've got another book coming out, haven't you?
I have. It's called Two Women in Home. Here is the lovely proof. The jacket will be different. Again, this is, circling around my old subjects of subversion and spies. And it's the story of an archivist who goes to live in Rome because she's not married, and she goes to work at the archive for the Archivo Espaciati, which is a completely fictional archive. But she looks at the death. She's been given a series of papers that have been unearthed from an old warehouse in Rome, where a lot of public papers were chucked after the war, and the authorities are just beginning to exhume them. And this was the deaths between 1880 and 1880 of expatriates, and finds one in particular, a woman called Nina Lawrence, who is a landscape gardener. And the more she reads, the more she unearths of these papers that she's there to catalogue and then store in the archive, the more a mystery begins to appear. And she finds that she has an affinity with Nina. And although she's never going to meet her, she can read her journal, which is named in the papers. And that journal leads her on a journey, not only of discovery about Nina and who she was and how she functioned, but also a discovery of how she, Lottie, is going to live her life, because there is a hole in her life which she hasn't yet managed to negotiate, a lack, if you like. And the other thing I was very keen on getting in, because Rome is this extraordinary Protean symbol, it's style, it's elegance, it's many layered, it has history that most cities just don't have. It has religious, mythological, classical, medieval, Renaissance. I wanted to get in the aspect of painting, which is so, I think, so important to Italy. I mean, obviously it's important elsewhere. And so a lot of the clues to Nina's life and her death are contained in some paintings. And I wanted again to make this point that we look at life straight on and we think we see everything, but actually you really need to look at the background of things, the tiny detail, to really find out the story. This is what she has to look in the background to work out what's going on in the less obvious things that are going on in the foreground. And I think it's quite a sad story, but it's a story of affirmation, because Lottie arrives at a point where what she finds out about Nina becomes important, if you like, stepping stone in the re-emergence of her own adult self and her marriage.
It sounds fascinating. I'm reminded of the use of the marionettes and the puppet theatre in the Museum of Broken Promises. So it's a completely different art form, but you used that as a really interesting metaphor. And the one scene, which I'm not going to give anything away, but you'll know the performance I'm talking about, was just so wrenching that Emma hadn't got that far in the book, and I nearly sent it to you, just that one passage, because it's very, very powerful. And do you, because I've not read widely enough, do you always try to find some sort of art to put in? Because you must, if you're in Europe, it must be such a temptation to bring into it.
Yes, because I don't know, I find it probably this will not, some people will not agree with my views, but I'm so grief-stricken that we've left Europe in that visionary kind of way where we thought we were all working together. But I find looking at their art has helped me, really, I suppose. Art is so integral to what Europe is and how it's developed. It's just a joy. It's a reaffirmation of things, that makes civilization what it is, makes civilization wonderful and exciting and sustaining and nourishing for the individual and their lives. Yes, I think that's right, Tracy. Yeah.
The other thing I wanted to ask you about before we run out of time is the character May in the Museum of Broken Promises, we talked to Ellie Griffiths a few months ago, and she said it's really useful. Yes. She said it's really useful to have another person who's sort of alongside your main character, because then they can have someone to do their explaining to. and to ask the questions. So they're not actually explaining directly to the reader, but May was able to sort of stand in for us as readers and ask all these questions, which we would like to have answered in her guise of, well, her role of interviewer. She was absolutely right to be pressing her buttons and asking all of these, because at first I thought, oh, she's a bit annoying, I wish she'd go away. But as it went on, I realized she was playing a really important role, and then does come through, and it's a good job she was there in the end. But was the May part of the plan all the way along?
Yes, you have to be very careful, and I hope I've managed to do it, because it is a device to a degree, and that can be very irritating, as you say, and very obvious. So the thing is, you have to make that device as good a character and as real a character and as motivated a character as you can make it. So then it becomes organic, if you like, and acceptable. Yeah.
To be fair, Lara found her irritating at the beginning as well.
She did. She did.
I think we were just sharing her irritation. Now, I thought it was very successful.
It's always a big decision to make, because it can be plonking, and you have to really guard against that. By the way, you might know, when Museum was published, I got in Italy, I got a letter from a lovely gentleman who has a museum near Lucca in, well, it's a little bit called Baja near Lucca. And he said, look, I run a museum which is devoted to my grandfather's paintings, the Casa Cugliati, some room. I very much want to devote this room, establishing a museum of broken promises. Would I mind? So I said, no, would I mind? I was absolutely enchanted, and it's beginning to do it. And then I talked to the Times diarist, Patrick Kidd, who was so enchanted by the idea too, that he rang up the correspondent in Rome, and they interviewed him, and there was a little piece in the Times about it. So I've got to send an object to the Museum of Broken Promises in Italy, which I'm about to do. I've yet to make them what it is. I could send my husband. No, I'm joking.
Really exciting. Yeah, life following art.
Yes.
So before we go, we're really curious, if someone's read all of your books and enjoyed them, what would you recommend that they read next?
All of yes. I was absolutely riveted by this book, 3 Hours by Rosamund Lutt. Have you come across it? You must have done.
I've got it in the shop somewhere, but I can't find it.
Yes. This is a sort of thriller, but with so much more attached to it. It is about a school in the winter in the grip of a terrorist attack, 2 terrorists there. And it is absolutely at the complexities and richness of emotion, of action, of your you think it's an obvious explanation as to what's happening. Of course it is. She's absolutely expert at keeping your questions still a question mark right to the end, and it's beautifully and wonderfully written. There's part of it that's so touching and moving in a way that very often, you know, more boiled thrillers aren't. And I thought this is a really rich and resonant book. And
it's not very long either, is it?
I'm sorry?
It's not very long either, is it?
No. What is it? It's hang on. It's about 200. It's 300 pages just.
300. Okay.
And the other one that I've been very privileged to read, which you'll be probably getting into the shop a bit later, because I think this is proof rather than the hard copy, which is Anne Sedbury of Ethel Rosenberg, one of the 2 of the couple who were executed in the 50s in America for giving secrets to the Russians. And I found this absolutely transfixing story of ordinary housewife drawn into this terrible tragedy, and difficult life was for a lot of the people, Jewish people in downtown New York during this time, and how prevalent communism was in America. It wasn't just they had decided to strike out. There was a real communist community because life was hard. Communism presented of trying to better yourself, trying to organize society better, and read it also with a feeling of utter dread, because you knew in the end she was going to be led to the electorate. And if ever there was an argument for banning capital punishment and its barbarities, this is it, because she wasn't really guilty. And that's the terrible, terrible thing that emerges from this novel, from this biography. And the quality of her research and the way she's pulled it together, all the court records and the people who were there working on the case, the political currents, the custom, it's just extraordinary. And you probably can't see, but there she was, a rather nondescript, rather dowdy woman in her 30s with 2 small sons who was desperate not to die and leave them. And yet it all happened. So I do recommend that. And there is another one. Have you got time for another one? Which I haven't begun to read yet, but I'm told it's really George Saunders who won the Booker with Lincoln in the Bardo, with A Swim in a Pond in the Rain, which he teaches Russian literature at his university. And this is which 4 Russians give a masterclass on reading, writing and life. And I could probably do with that. It'd teach me some things.
I've heard good
because
things about
I think
that.
As a writer, you're always on a bound in every kind of way to try and better what you do, better how you write, better how you see things. And I'm sure George Saunders, who is terrific, can do that. I haven't read it yet, so I can't report on what I think.
I've heard very good things from other booksellers, but as you say, it's not published yet, so we haven't got a copy yet.
Yeah.
Where is it?
And I've just read Where the Crawdads Sing by Delia Rowan, which I thoroughly enjoyed.
Oh yes,
You've probably sold millions. Yeah.
We've sold a couple of million.
Yeah. I thought good about this book. A, it was a debut. My gosh, it was astonishing. But B, it was mythic in the sense it took innocent and pitted her against the world, natural world and the human world, and how innocence is their way. And I think she did that aspect of it very, very well.
Okay, I was just trying to get a copy handed to me. You know that it's been a popular book because I've had lots of proofs coming in recently that say this is the new Where the Crawdads Sing. So it's kind of the Harry Potter accolade. They're all the new Where the Crawdads Sing now. So it is very good. Yes, I completely agree with you on that.
Yeah, good.
Excellent.
Anyway.
Okay, well, it's been absolutely a joy talking to you and hearing more about your writing. And when we are able to have you come by, we would love to welcome you back. So,
I'd love to come. I really would.
Excellent. Okay. Well, thank you again for talking to us this morning.
Pleasure.
Bye.